If you're a church or a leader in a church, young or old, you're confronting new challenges in ministry right now that couldn't have even existed 10 years ago. And my belief is that these new challenges require a particular mindset to successfully navigate them. And so in this episode, I'll explain this bias for action mindset I'm talking about and why it's critical for you as a church leader.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Pro Church Tools, the show to help you share the message of Jesus while we navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by Brady Shearer.
Yesterday, I'm in my kitchen and I'm standing at my pantry, which is directly next to the fridge in our home. So I'm standing at the pantry, and then directly next to me at the fridge is my brother-in-law, Ryland.
Right. What's he doing there?
Well, he lives in our house. He
Makes
lives
sense.
in a downstairs, but he also works here at Pro Church
Yes.
Tools. So if you've ever had an interaction with Ryland because you subscribe to one of our products like Nucleus or Rebel Gib, and you've surely had a great interaction with him. He does an amazing job. But yesterday, he was upset. Looked at something in our fridge, and he's like, what is that? Is that tapioca? And I was like, oh, actually, that's my oatmeal, Ryland. I made it earlier this morning. And he's
I didn't want it, so I put it in the fridge.
No, I made 2 portions.
Okay. Nice. Cook once, eat twice.
Yeah,
Nice.
steel cutouts, they take a while to make, you know?
That's true.
So he goes, you eat oatmeal now? Which was the proper reaction. To which I said, look, I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yes, so I had some oatmeal. I have some left over. That's the end of the story.
I'm ashamed of it, okay?
You might be asking, Brady, why are you telling us this weird story about oatmeal disguised as tapioca? And the reason is I had a conversation with my wife later that day, and I said to her, Britt, I feel like I realized something about myself today, or at least have articulated it in a different way. And that is my willingness, in fact, it's usually more than willingness, a compulsion perhaps, to try anything and everything when I notice something in my life that's not working the way that I want it to. And I saw a tweet earlier this week that said it differently. And the way this tweet phrased this kind of default position or posture in life is a bias for action.
Okay.
This mindset that there's something wrong, there's something that is out of balance, something that needs to be fixed, and it's my duty to change it, to right that wrong, and I've got to do something. And the best way to fix it is to, try something different, because I can't get somewhere I have never been if haven't done something I've never done. Like I gotta fix it. It's the one on the Enneagram.
So you were like, there's not enough oatmeal in my life. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna have some oatmeal.
Oh, right. Okay, right. I guess I should talk about the reason I made the oatmeal. Well, see, I don't normally like to eat too many carbs,
Right.
because they generally make me feel crummy. But I noticed that if I don't eat any carbs for an extreme long period of time, I have really low mood. My leptin levels are dropping.
So you were trying a new thing.
Right. And I was like, okay, I'm going to eat carbs, but only a really good carb,
Right.
steel cut oats.
Nice.
And I'm going to have it directly before my workout only.
Okay.
And so that was why I tried to make the oatmeal. And it's weird because it was almost like eating breakfast, which, if you know me, is unheard
you
of.
do not do
Never
that.
eat breakfast. But this
You're coming to the breakfast side.
no,
Let's
okay.
go.
Look, first of all, I ate it at like 11:30. Can that technically be breakfast?
That's earlier than you usually
Point being, I was willing to do something that I had never done, that is
Yes.
completely outside of the realm of what I normally do, because I felt like something was not right and it had to be fixed.
And as somebody who knows you well, that is something that's like a posture. That's something that you're very prone to do. If there's something that's not really working well, or it's time to try something new, like you're the kind of guy who's just like, well, I'm gonna do it. Like, I'm doing this now. I'm not doing it tomorrow. I'm doing it today.
And there are downsides to this bias for action mindset.
Sure.
Because if you've worked at Pro Church Tools,
Right.
you can know that sometimes there's a bit of volatility to the...
You get seasick if you're not careful.
Right. It's like, there've been running jokes in our meetings where I'd be like, oh, are you bringing this back? Or, oh, are we launching a new product? Are you doing this differently?
Yeah. Do I still work here?
And maybe I get a little defensive. Who knows? So there can be a downside to this, but I think it is one of the best mindsets, one of the best philosophies that you can bring to your role as a leader, but also to your church as an organization. And I did a kind of Ask Me Anything on Instagram stories a couple of days ago. And one of the common themes of the questions that I got is like, okay, like, how did you start Pro Church Tools? How did you get to where you are today? What are some of the things that you've learned along the way building, this company from scratch to where it is now? And I think, trying to be self-aware as I can, one of the greatest assets that I've had along this journey is this bias for action, this willingness to try anything. Because what's amazing is, this is perhaps the best way that I can articulate it. Most of us are very comfortable staying where we're at
Sure.
because we'd rather be familiar with our surroundings and familiar with our routine, familiar and comfortable where we're at, even if it's not quite where we want to be, because at least it feels familiar.
Yeah, it's safe.
And so if you imagine that over the course of a decade, just imagine like a graph and there's a straight line right across the center. And there's no necessarily upward or downward trajectory, but it's almost a perfectly straight line. Whereas the way that I generally approach things, if I look back over the last 10 years, so from when I was 18 to when I was 28, I think based on what I've been trying to accomplish, personally and professionally and spiritually, there would be a pretty strong upward trend from left to right on the graph. But if you zoomed in, it would not be linear whatsoever. You'd see a spike
of peaks
and then
and
a
valleys.
massive drop and then a spike, because I'm always saying, well, this isn't right. I'm going to try this. And I try something and it's wildly unsuccessful. But if you look back over 10 years, you'd be like, Braid, like you're able to do so many different things right. And it's kind of like that Thomas Edison quote. It's like, well, I tried 10,000 things that were wrong. And I didn't necessarily fail all those times, but I tried things that were wrong only to discover eventually, and I would say inevitably, because my stubbornness is so strong, I found the solution.
So where do you think that comes from? Is that something that you've learned, or you think that's something that's like baked into who you are or how you are?
Well, that's a good question, because I remember growing up distinctly, both my mom and my dad encouraging me almost definitely, in fact, to the point where I would say, stop it, I don't want to hear this anymore. They'd be like, son, you are so tremendously skilled. You can do anything that you want. And I don't
Okay, Mom.
I don't know if they were saying it from like a posture of, go for it, son. Because like, I guess that is kind of what millennial parents did. Like they said you can do anything, and then we all became soft and fragile. But I think what they saw was I was able to pick up skills pretty quickly. And I think you were the same in this respect. And so they noticed that, like, man, like, if you just put your mind to something, you can do it. And so then this kind of became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is what I really want to tap into in this episode, is that this is one of those things, like any kind of habitual change can be very difficult. I kind of imagine like turning like a giant crank that you have to turn like 180 degrees. Like it's not just like a simple on-off switch. You kind of have to like just turn it a bit, and then you just keep kind of moving it and moving it bit by bit until eventually it gets there. Because the narratives that we tell ourselves are so powerful. And we were in Iceland recently, you and I, for 2 weeks. And, when you're living with someone for 2 weeks, even though we spend a lot of time together and have been on many trips like this together, you eventually get into these like deep conversations. Yeah. And I don't know if you care to recount the one that we had about narratives and how, nothing is real and we're all just telling each other stories and everything's fake, because I think it's those stories that allow us to, let's say, maybe adopt a bias for action. Because, if you're like most people, like let's say our wives, the number 6 on the Enneagram, like the thing that you crave is security and comfort, knowing that what's surrounding you is familiar so that you can feel safe and secure. But that is almost directly antithetical to this bias for action, because if you want to have a bias for action, which I think you need to navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years because everything is chaotic, you need to be willing to take a step into the unknown.
Well, and for folks like you and me, who are both number 1 on the Enneagram, we kind of have a bent towards reforming these kinds of things. So like seeing things, whether it's in our personal life or in our ministry, like in the way I function at church, in the way we run programs at church, we have a bent towards like seeing where things can be improved, and then just going ahead and making a move to improve them. And often to others around us, that can feel like a pretty fast pace, and can sometimes feel a little bit volatile, especially for our wives, who are both 6s, which you just mentioned. May God bless our wives.
Thank you, Lord.
And so for us, this comes a little bit more naturally. And then there are other people who are surely in church leadership who maybe this will feel a bit like a shift in perspective. This might not feel as natural, but I really do like wholeheartily agree with you here that it's definitely, I think, more beneficial as faith communities where we're trying to move people in next steps with their life, in their life with Jesus, in their walk with Jesus, to err on the side of trying more things more often than the opposite side of just like not trying new things because it's safe and it's comfortable here. Because if you were to look at your church's growth over a course of 10 years, I think if you just stay safe and don't try new things, maybe because it's more comfortable or it keeps people happy, you're going to see that very linear line, and the growth isn't going to be ascending very much. But if you're willing to like jump in the deep end and just try things and be willing to fail, you may start to see this upward trajectory in personal growth of your folks at church, and then your church community as a whole growing in their life with Jesus.
We're going to get into kind of ways that you can begin to adopt this posture if it's not something that comes naturally to you. But I also want to make a case for why I think that this is a biblical perspective to life, and how I think even though it can be uncomfortable at times for yourself and maybe especially those around you, living in this way is a great way to practice the faith of following Jesus. And the first reason is that I think it comes from a position of humility. The willingness to look around and say, things are not right. I don't have everything figured out. And I'm willing, anything's up for grabs, to kind of sacrifice, try something new. One thing that we hear a lot in churches is, well, this is just the way that we've always done it, which can come off sometimes as like a really arrogant perspective and stance. Like, we have this figured out.
Right.
And I think that this becomes more easy the older that you get.
Yeah, sure.
Because you've done things that have worked to a degree because you are alive. And so you've kind of conditioned yourself that this is the way that things are done. And so I kind of want to like live in this way where like my hands are always open, willing to like trade out something for something else, willing to say, look, I've always done it this way and it's worked maybe X% of the way, but I think that there's something even better for me.
Yeah.
And having that humility to say, I don't have it all figured out. There are things that I'm doing that are wrong, that are out of line, that can be aligned further with Christ, and I'm willing to explore those.
Yeah, so true.
Secondly, to have a bias for action kind of requires you to be friends with failure, because it cannot exist, a bias for action, without the willingness to fail, because you will fail.
Sure, you're going to throw things at the wall, and less things will stick than the ones that don't. Like,
Yeah.
You'll probably fail more often than you don't.
Absolutely. And you have to be okay with that, because if you're not, you'll just go back, retreat into that shell of familiarity and comfort. But the second that you've done that, you've also kind of resolved, like, this is as good as it's ever going to be. And that leads me to the third reason why I think that this is a biblical posture, is that the foundation for it all is redemption, believing that everything can be renewed and taken from really bad to really good. And this is the Romans 8:28 mindset of like, God is taking everything and working them together for the good of those who love him, which kind of goes back to the failure thing. It's like when I fail and I have like tried a million different types of oatmeal, let's say, like that being a metaphor, I've tried so many different things that haven't worked. I just take that as, all right, like the Lord has led me to realizing one thing that has not worked, and that just means I'm one step closer to figuring out what does work. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I actually really love that word and framing this as redemption, because the ones on the Enneagram are often perpetuated as perfectionists, which is a term that I've kind of learned to loathe a bit. I don't love that label.
He loathes it a lot.
I do, and so I love to adopt the identity of a reformer, but to take it even a step further, that sure, this is reformation, but in the context of our church, this looks like redemption. I think that's deeply profound.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you think it's profound.
Yeah. I may need to just take like a moment here.
It's just very different. It's not like most of the episodes that we normally do.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's get back to some familiarity.
Okay.
3 steps to adopting the bias for change mindset in your own life. Firstly, you got to recognize that this is contrarian both to your natural predisposition as a human, but also it's going to be contrarian to those around you.
Sure.
You're going to get a lot of pushback. I can't tell you how many times I've felt almost like looked down upon or shamed for trying something new. Even by those that are really close to me and those that like love me, they're like nothing's ever good enough for you. Right? It's like,
right.
Or like, why are you trying this thing again? Like, you're just gonna fail again. Like sometimes people, like The bad side of this is that person that's always trying new things, but they can never see it out to fruition. So you don't
Right.
even give this new thing a chance to prove if it's going to work for you or not. And so there's that person that we kind of all know who's like, they can't stick to anything. And that's kind of like the worst shade of this predisposition or from this posture. And so just recognize that like people around you are going to think it's silly. Your own internal talk is going to like talk you down from this idea. And that's just kind of part of it, because it really is literally like going against the grain, fighting against the current.
Yeah, and I think each day that you get older, this is going to be more challenging, because with age, we know that we are less adaptable to change. And so with each day that we get older, we are likely intrinsically going to resist change a little bit more. And then for all the days that the people in your church community are older than you, it's going to be a little more difficult for them too. Now, in saying that, you can create a culture that is on board, and it will take time, but you can create, you can model a culture of having a bias for action where this feels like the normal pace that we move at. And eventually, I think you'll start to see that bell curve come back down, and it may get easier. But it is kind of counterintuitive to how we, I think, as humans are predisposed just to be, just to have a hard time with change. And so just be aware of that, because as you get older, it might not get easier until you've adopted that culture.
The second way to adopt this idea and this culture is to buy into the principle for its merit, not the material results that it will bring. This is the cliche. It's all, it's about the journey. It's not about the destination. It's a cliche because it's true.
Right.
Buy into this principle for its merit, not for its material results. We talked about why I think this is a biblical posture to life, a biblical perspective on life. If you went about this and maybe you never like accomplished the things or reached the things that you want to, if nothing else, you're still every day practicing humility and practicing, this view of life that redemption is possible for every person, and not just for every person, but every single element of their life. Like, if nothing else, that makes it worth it.
And the younger leaders who are growing underneath you are going to be so much less concerned about the end result of what you're doing, but to watch you in the process and see that you don't, as a leader, you don't have a fear of failure. That's going to give them so much more permission as younger leaders. When it's their turn to step up to the bat, it's going to give them so much more permission, so much more freedom to swing, for the fences, and know that if they fail, like, it's okay. And that is so ironic, because one of our fears as ones on the Enneagram is failure, right? Is doing something not good enough. So this is almost like pushing back against that and resisting it, being like, it's okay if we fail, because we know why we're doing what we're doing.
That's huge, because I have found it's hugely helpful to manufacture things in your life that you don't like. Like, life is pretty good for me, pretty privileged. Everything is pretty, like, generally good. So one of the reasons I love working out and like restricting macros or calories or whatever is like it manufactures stress and like bodily pain, like literal physical pain from like lifting heavy weights. Those things are like, just kind of teaching my body and my mind to respond to things that I don't like in healthy ways. And so manufacture, if you're a 1 on the Enneagram like us, you're the type that on the best days you're a reformer, on the worst days you're a perfectionist, you're afraid of failure. You can kind of implement this. You're manufacturing in your life the things that you shouldn't be able to handle, which will enable you over time to handle them better. The final thing, and this is the biggest thing, which you can't articulate on a single episode well enough to probably just require years of therapy, is like you've got to change the narrative and the way that you view yourself. If you asked me, what's the single biggest contributor to your success professionally in business with Pro Church Tools, I would go back to a single moment in my final year of Bible college. I was living newly married on a 14th floor apartment in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada with my wife, 1-bedroom apartment. And I was sitting at the table in our kitchen / living room / studio
everything,
where I recorded all of our YouTube videos. And I remember like praying, calling out to God. I'd been doing Pro Church Tools for, let's say, 4 months, and we hadn't like a single client whatsoever. This was back when our only product was client services. And I was like, Lord, I know 4 months is not that long, but I have no job. I just need like 1, 2. I need 3 churches to sign up, Lord. That's it. Just like 3.
Yeah.
And within the next 4 weeks, I think 6 churches had signed up for our client
go.
services product.
Won't he double it?
Okay. Thank you, Lord. And I look back on that, and I think the reason no one had signed up was because I launched the business in April. Like, it was summertime. Everyone was on vacation.
Yeah.
Like, August came around and churches were signing up.
Yeah.
You know, so like, I'm not saying it wasn't a miracle from the Lord, but also like, you know, there was a little seasonal element to this. But the point is, that single moment where like I had created income out of thin air on the internet gave me this. It's hard to explain how much confidence that it gave me. It gave me a new narrative.
Sure.
It was like, you just solved a problem that many people told you was unsolvable. Like, my parents believed in me for a lot of things. They didn't believe in this. Like, they were like, you can't just get money on the internet, son. It's not going to work.
You got to get off the couch,
Like,
right?
don't quit Bible college, son. And I didn't. I kept that promise to them. Even my wife, like, why are you always wearing a bathrobe? Like, get dressed, have a shower. I'm going to my second job so you can mess around with WordPress themes. Like, and then you have that all internal self-talk. Like, is this really a thing? It's really going to work. And that day when it really turned around, it gave me this supreme amount of confidence, this new narrative, this new story for my own life that like, there's no problem that's really unsolvable.
Right.
And when you believe that about yourself, it goes back to that graph, which if you take anything away from this episode, to me, this is the most powerful thing. If you just imagine your next 10 years, your church's next 10 years, if you're willing to kind of trade out this really stagnant line that is perfectly straight and linear and is comfortable, but
So
you're,
perfect.
you're just not going to really go anywhere. If you're willing to trade that out for this upward trend where if you zoom in day to day, week to week, month to month, it is wildly volatile, I think that you can get where you want to go. Because once I had this confidence to attack the problems in my life with this ability that I don't care how long it takes, I will solve you.
Yeah.
You will be solved by me, because I can do all things through Christ.
Nice.
Like, I just started looking at anything like, this is not how it should be. Now it will be this way. This is not how it should be. Now it will be this way. And then when the like hugest issues I've ever confronted that came around in my 20s, you know, one of them was like losing mom, way bigger than I need 3 clients to replace my like meager, you know, church income. I had the ability to attack them where I was like, you know, this is the biggest tragic wave I've ever had to attack. And it's like forcing me to question my faith. And it's forcing me like to readjust all these narratives because I thought things were going this way, but now like out of my control, it's all been taken away. And, you know, no problem is unsolvable through Jesus. And I was able to, you know, attack them in a way that was ultimately healthy.
That's so good. When you were just describing that chart again, I was thinking about how I feel like it mirrors the life that we have documented in the Gospels of you know, those first followers of Jesus. Like just how, you know, some of them were just like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm just a fisherman. Like I get in the boat, I fish every day. Like this is what I do. Or like I'm a tax collector. I just sit at the gate and I take the taxes. And then all of a sudden they say yes. And they're on this wild ride of like peaks and valleys and demons getting cast out and demons not getting cast out and rebukes from the Lord and praises from the Lord and all those things.
I denied him 3 times.
Yeah. And it's like, now I'm building his church. I don't know.
What, we're eating meat now? No, I had a dream. The whole council says you're crazy. I had this dream.
Right. But I honestly think that's what life looks like. When people ask me about my life, one of my saved responses is like, it's a wild ride. Like life with Jesus, this life of faith is a wild ride, but it is the best because we know it's on that like upward trajectory. And I think that's totally applicable to what we're talking about here. And this is something that we can implement first of all and foremost into our own lives, but then into the life of our churches as leaders, so that we can take people on that wild journey with Jesus. That is kind of volatile, that is kind of crazy, that does have peaks, that does have valleys.
Where feet may fail.
Yeah, you know, and it's only going to be for the better. It's going to take a lot of courage, and I think that's a story that we need to start telling ourselves. A story that you told yourself that has changed the trajectory of your life. The story that we all need to start telling ourselves that like, yeah, if I step out on this ledge, it's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. And that courage comes from faith in a God who says it's going to be okay. He says, do not be afraid. You know, somebody said they counted all the times in scripture. It says, do not be afraid. It's 365 times or whatever. It's like they're enough for every day. Do not be afraid and take courage because God is good and he is who he says he is.
Final note that I think is important. If you know me personally and you've spent enough time with me, there will come about moments where you realize I'm doing something that is just nonsensical. Not because I'm trying something new,
Right.
but because I'm an idiot. like, I can't think of a particular example right now.
And you're not asking me.
Well, I mean, if you have one, it might be helpful for the purpose of illustration. Feel free to jump in. But like, I'll notice something and I'll be like, oh, no one told me that that you should load a dishwasher in that way. Oh, okay. That actually makes a lot more sense.
Mm-hmm.
It is actually mind-boggling how poor my practical skills are for the most part. And, just people need to remind me, no, the screwdriver goes this way. I'm watching a How I Met Your Mother episode. They're like, righty, tighty, lefty, loosey.
It's like,
write that down. That's a game changer. And so I think my guess is when you look from the exterior, it can look like, man, look at all the things that Brady has accomplished materially. He must just have this predisposed level of brilliance that he can do this. No, I just tried most things.
Yeah.
Before Pro Church Tools, I was a DJ, and before that I was a painter, and before that I learned and played in a band drums, bass, guitar, piano. Then I produced my an entire album from scratch. Then I went to Bible college to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Before that, I was all into academics. And then before that, I had every sport, like basketball and rugby and volleyball and football. And I just wasn't, good enough at any of them. I was just, DJing? What? What is that? Painting? Sure. I love watercolor. I'm telling you true stories.
Yeah.
And eventually,
something stuck.
blogging on YouTube.
Yeah.
And eventually it stuck. And so this just predisposition to keep trying things again and again can make you seem really smart because you've tried all the things that don't work. Hopefully this episode had at least one small nugget of helpfulness for you. That'll do it for this episode. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching this video. We publish new videos every single week. Alex is so busy, he can't even get out of his chair. So subscribe so you never miss another one.
And like it, please, so you can tell all your friends that you like it. See you.